My son banned me from his wedding, yet dared to send me a bill for nearly $80,000. Inside the envelope, I expected an invitation, but instead I found charges for a mansion venue, imported wine, and a honeymoon in Hawaii, signed with a note, "Be grateful I let you contribute." That day, heartbreak turned into fury, and I vowed his dream wedding would not go as planned. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. The living room felt colder than usual that evening, though the heater hummed faintly in the corner. I sat in my old armchair, the one Linda had insisted on buying 25 years ago when we were still young enough to argue about colors and fabric, and let my eyes wander around the space that had carried our life like a vessel. The shelves were lined with picture frames. Daniel as a boy holding a baseball bat, too heavy for his little arms. Linda in her apron, laughing as if she could never be broken. And me, younger, stronger, unaware of how much the years would take. My mind replayed the countless sacrifices I had made, each one now stinging like salt on an open wound. I remembered working double shifts after Linda was diagnosed, counting the dollars until I reached that heavy number, $60,000. That was what Daniel's tuition had cost by the time he walked across the stage at State. $60,000 I scraped together by canceling vacations, selling the old Ford pickup, and ignoring the pain in my knees as I worked overtime at the warehouse. Then came the car, a used sedan I bought for $20,000 because Daniel said commuting without one would ruin his chances at internships. I watched him drive off in it, his smile wide, while I stood in the driveway with my back aching, thinking it was all worth it. Even before that, there were the hospital bills, Linda's treatments, the endless tests, the nights of hope followed by mornings of despair. I had sold a small plot of land my father left me, the one near the creek where we once camped, just to pay for another round of procedures. And in my pocket now, resting like a reminder, was the silver watch my father had given me, the only thing I refused to sell. I whispered under my breath, as if Linda were still in the kitchen listening. "I gave everything for him, Lynn. Everything." My voice cracked. The room stayed silent, but the betrayal echoed louder than any answer could. As I sat there, the weight of what Daniel and his wife were planning pressed down on me. My house, the very walls surrounding me, was worth $600,000 now. That wasn't just real estate, it was decades of memories, laughter, grief, and rebuilding after loss. Every floorboard, some of which I had nailed in myself when we expanded the dining room, held pieces of our story. Yet to them, it had become a number, a commodity, to liquidate. Alongside that, I had about $200,000 in savings, money I had guarded carefully through all the years of scrimping, never daring to touch it except for emergencies. Now I realized in their eyes that the account wasn't mine. It was theirs, already counted, already spent, as if I had become nothing more than a machine that spat out cash. I thought of the way Daniel looked at me during our last conversation, not with affection, but with a kind of calculated distance. He had suggested almost casually that maybe the house was too much for me, that maybe I would be happier in assisted living. Happier, he said, as if stripping me of independence and roots would bring me joy. What hurt most wasn't the financial betrayal, it was the emotional one. The bond between father and son had been carved up and sold like an asset. I had loved him unconditionally, but he saw me as a ledger to be cleared, a burden to be shifted. My fingers brushed the frame of a family photo on the mantel, the three of us smiling in front of this very house, and I felt something inside me fracture. The strangest part of betrayal is how it makes you see the past differently. As I stared at that photo, I remembered when Daniel was small, how he used to run across the backyard barefoot, chasing fireflies with a jar in his hands. Linda would be in the kitchen, frying tamales for dinner, her laughter spilling out of the open window. I could still smell the mix of masa and fresh cilantro whenever I closed my eyes. There was a rainy afternoon when Daniel begged me to take him to the park. We went, even though the weather was terrible, and ended up soaked to the bone, but he laughed so hard that day I thought my chest would burst with pride. I remembered the Little League games, the way he swung the bat too soon, then too late, until one day he finally hit the ball and ran the bases with his arms stretched like he could fly. Those moments, those fragile threads of joy, were what kept me alive after Linda died. They were proof that despite the bills, the grief, the exhaustion, there had been something worth fighting for. Yet now those memories felt weaponized. Every good thing I had poured into him made the betrayal sharper. It wasn't just that Daniel had turned against me. It was that the child I had loved seemed erased, replaced by a man who no longer remembered the father who stood in the rain with him. My chest ached as I thought about the arguments that had started to creep into our relationship after Linda passed. Daniel blamed me in ways he never dared to say outright, until one day he finally spat it out. "If you had made more money, maybe Mom's treatments could have been better." The words had cut deeper than any knife. I had given every ounce of myself, and still it hadn't been enough. That bitterness had grown in him, fed by his success in the tech industry, where money seemed to fall from the sky and status became a substitute for love. Over time, he visited less, called less, until our conversations became stiff and transactional. I was no longer Dad. I was an obstacle, a liability, a problem to solve. The house and the savings were just the last chapter in a story of distance that had been writing itself for years. I told myself I should have seen it coming, but knowing that didn't make it hurt less. Yet as the pain swirled around me, another feeling began to take root. I looked again at the silver watch in my hand, the one my father had given me when I turned 21. I remembered his words. "Never let anyone decide your worth, son. Not the world, not even family." My eyes drifted to the old photograph of Linda on the mantel, her eyes bright even in black and white. I whispered to her, barely breathing the words, "I won't let anger blind me, Lynn, but I won't be their victim either." Saying it out loud steadied me, as if she were right there, nodding, telling me to stand tall. The shock of betrayal hadn't disappeared, but it was no longer the only force in me. Something harder, sharper had begun to grow. I realized that grief and rage, if left unchecked, would consume me. But determination could save me. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt a sliver of control. I knew I couldn't change Daniel's heart, but I could protect what was mine. The realization was like oxygen after drowning. I sat up straighter, my body remembering its strength despite the years. My gaze swept across the room until it landed on a stack of folders by the desk. That was where the mortgage papers, the insurance documents, and the deed to the house were kept. A thought sparked in my mind, clear and undeniable. Knowledge was power, and paper was proof. If Daniel and his wife thought they could quietly maneuver me into a corner, they had underestimated the man who had built this life brick by brick. Slowly, deliberately, I moved to the desk, my knees protesting, but my resolve was stronger than the pain. I opened the top drawer and pulled out the folder with the deed. The embossed seal of the county glinted under the lamplight. My name, not his, was on that paper. That was leverage. That was armor. My hand trembled slightly as I closed the folder, not from fear, but from a new kind of energy, one I hadn't felt in years. This was no longer about survival. It was about dignity. I whispered again, this time with steel in my voice. "You won't erase me, Daniel. Not yet." The glow from the lamp cast long shadows across the room as I carried the folder to the coffee table. I placed it down gently, like a weapon laid in preparation. Then, almost without thinking, I reached for the laptop that had been gathering dust on the side table. Its screen flickered to life, and I stared at the search bar as if it were a doorway. For years, I had used this machine only for paying bills and checking email, but tonight it became something else, a tool for survival. I began typing about property rights, elder law, options for protecting assets. Names of lawyers appeared. Articles about trusts and power of attorney scrolled by. Every word was a reminder that I wasn't helpless. I knew on my side, and knowledge was the one thing Daniel hadn't accounted for. The house smelled faintly of old wood and coffee, grounding me in the present, while the screen before me opened doors to the future. I imagined Linda's hand on my shoulder, steadying me, reminding me that our story wasn't finished. As the clock ticked past midnight, I leaned closer to the glow of the screen, my eyes no longer dulled by grief, but sharpened by resolve. "This is just the beginning," I murmured. And for the first time since betrayal knocked the breath from my chest, I believed it. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment one below to let me know you're here with me. Morning crept over the living room like a careful painter, laying gold across the oak floor I installed in 1995 and the photo of Linda smiling in her apron. I poured coffee and set it beside a grid of papers on the table. The deed with its raised county seal, bank statements totaling $200,000, a folder labeled letters, and a yellow pad with 3 names. I listened to the house they wanted to turn into numbers and decided shock would not be the last word. Action would be. I began with Mark Brennan because paper trails need a guide. Mark is a wedding planner, part showman, and part quartermaster, the man who once made Daniel's engagement party look like a magazine cover. His number still lived in my old address book. I dialed and waited. Mark Brennan. "Mark, it's Richard Caldwell, Daniel's father." "Richard," he said, "how can I help?" "I need your files, Daniel's engagement contracts. I want to understand how he writes control on paper. My house appraises around $600,000 and my savings are $200,000 more. I'm not a checkbook with feet." Mark exhaled. "I archive everything. He tried to add a family guarantor for vendor overruns. I refused. Felt predatory." "Send the red lines and finals?" "I shouldn't," he said, then softened. "But sometimes the rule book protects the wrong player. Email?" 10 minutes later, my printer coughed out 40 pages. I spread them under the lamp and read, "Guarantor language, delegated decision authority, expedited reimbursements." The same vocabulary is now circling my head. I clipped the stack, wrote "pattern of overreach" on a tab, and felt my hand steady. Information invited momentum. I turned to the second name, Michael Reyes, the kid who once called me coach in my garage and now wore a badge. His number answered on the second ring. "Mr. Caldwell," he said. "Been a long time." "Michael, I need counsel and maybe equipment. Daniel is trying to take the house and pry open my accounts. His lawyer demanded $80,000 for so-called familial obligations." "That's coercion wearing a tie," he said. "Good news. You live in a one-party consent state. You can legally record conversations you're part of. Do not bug rooms to capture people without you present. Keep timestamps, originals, and 2 backups. If he brings papers, do not sign. Say you'll sleep on it and root through counsel." "I need a lawyer," I said. "Evelyn Hart," he replied. "Elder law, sharp and honest. I'll bring a kit and her card after lunch." He arrived with daylight and a hard case. On my kitchen table, he lay out 2 pocket recorders, a button camera with a magnet mount, spare batteries, and a thumb drive. We walked through the living room. He taught me where sound gathers. Under the mantel, by the hallway corner, halfway down the staircase. We tested placement and voice tone. The trial recording was clear. At the door, he gripped my shoulder. "Defense isn't loud," he said. "Defense is patient, and it wins." On the way to the bank, I rehearsed lines the way sailors practice knots. The lobby smelled like wax and coin metal. I met the branch manager, Carla, and asked for a verbal password on phone transactions, in-person ID for any transfer over $10,000, and a hold on outbound wires unless I appeared with ID. She printed confirmations. I rented a safe deposit box and carried the key home like a small new anchor. Back in the living room, I called Mark to thank him. "He pressed me to designate an elder relative as a guarantor," Mark said. I told him reputation breaks at that edge. "Your emails are evidence," I said. "If a lawyer calls, tell the truth." "I will," he replied. Just after dusk, a heavy envelope arrived. Attorney Collins. The letter said, "Failure to tender $80,000 within 30 days could be construed as neglect, inviting legal remedy. It dressed a shove as a handshake. I smoothed the paper and slid it into the letters folder, then called Michael. "Classic pressure," he said. "Do not answer. Let counsel speak. Meanwhile, we gather." Gathering began the next evening when Daniel called. I set a recorder under the mantel, pressed the red dot, and answered on the second ring. "Dad," he said, sugar over steel. "You got Collins's note and the assisted living brochure. This isn't about force. It's a responsibility. The market's hot. 600,000 if we move now. Peace of mind. Friends your age." "I saw the letter," I said. "Very formal." He laughed. "That's how adults handle business. There's a simple transfer for convenience, so I can manage listing, offers, and closing. Sign, and we move. Delay and value evaporate." "I'll sleep on it," I said. "I don't sign on a first read." I replayed the call and named the file with a calm hand. Brick by brick, evidence builds a wall. By morning, Michael and I were at a coffee shop near the courthouse that smelled like cinnamon and fresh toner. We searched for elder law counsel with patience and spine and found Evelyn Hart 2 blocks away, above a florist. Her receptionist listened, asked 3 questions, and gave me a same-day consultation. I wore my best jacket and walked up the stairs, feeling the house at my back. Evelyn greeted me with a firm handshake. She listened, asked for dates, amounts, and copies, then folded her hands. "Here's what we'll do," she said. "I will notify Collins that all communications go through counsel. You will not pay $80,000. We will identify further direct contact as a potential undue influence. Then we will build a living trust with you as trustee and beneficiary, so unilateral sale is impossible without your consent. We will also prepare a simple will update. Do not sign anything they hand you. Send me copies of all letters, emails, and recordings." "Daniel does not have power of attorney," I said. "Good," she replied. "He remains a son, not an agent. If he shows up and refuses to leave, call the police and use the phrase undue influence. Keep recording. Back up twice." I signed her engagement letter. On the sidewalk, I stood in the smell of lilies and felt something tighten into place. Control is quiet. All afternoon, I rehearsed responses. I walked from room to room and said lines meant for survival. "Please email the draft. I will review with counsel. No decisions today." I taped a checklist inside the hall closet. Recorders charged, backup saved, safe deposit updated Friday, no signatures. Just after nightfall, footsteps crossed my porch. I clicked the recorder, opened the door, and let Daniel step inside. He didn't sit. He scanned the crown molding and windows like a realtor. He set a folder on the table and nudged it toward me. "Simple transfer for convenience," he said. "Title stays with you, but I'll manage the sale. We reduce decision fatigue." "Leave it," I said. "You should sign now," he replied. "I will review with counsel," I answered. His smile thinned. "You hired a lawyer?" "I did." "Dad, competent families consolidate and act." "Competent families protect their elders," I said, "not corner them." He tried 2 more angles, taxes and gutters. I let both fall. He gathered his coat and left a smile that didn't touch his eyes. The door clicked shut. I labeled the recording and scanned the draft transfer for Evelyn. Michael arrived later with fresh batteries. We sat with tea while Linda's photo glowed on the mantel. I repeated Daniel's phrases. Michael wrote in a small notebook. "Decision fatigue. Transfer for convenience. Market hot. Sign. And we move." He showed me one more placement for a recorder near the front door to catch careless sentences. We practiced again, the device blinking like a patient's heartbeat. When he stood to leave, I set the safe deposit key beside the silver watch. "I used to think control sounded like shouting," I said. "Turns out it sounds like paperwork and patience." Michael smiled. "It sounds like you," he said. After he left, I checked batteries and locks, folded Collins's letter beside the deed, slid Mark's emails into a sleeve labeled exhibits, and backed up the recordings to a thumb drive and a portable hard drive I bought for $89. I dated the labels in block letters because clarity is its armor. Before bed, I added one more layer of caution. I called the bank's fraud desk and requested alerts for any debit over $1,000 and twice daily balance emails. The agent asked for a passphrase. I gave her the name of the creek where Linda and I used to fish. Then I opened the county recorder's website and enrolled in property fraud alerts so any filing against my parcel number would ping my phone. I printed the confirmations and slid them behind the deed. These were small clicks, but each one felt like sandbags set before the rain. The next afternoon, Evelyn called to preview language for the trust. She read the key sentence. The trustee shall not convey, encumber, or transfer the residence without the express written consent of the settlor personally acknowledged. I repeated the words and felt them brace the walls. She also suggested a medical directive so no one could claim urgency as a shortcut. I agreed. After the call, I made copies of my ID and 2 utility bills for her file, slipped them into a clear sleeve, and labeled it Originals Stay Home. I am not fast, but I am thorough, and thoroughness is its kind of speed when someone hopes you will trip for safety. My phone chimed. Evelyn's email read, Trust draft tomorrow. Do not engage with Collins. Stand firm. Itch. I printed that too. I watered Linda's lilies and said out loud that I was all right. I listened to the rain begin and felt the future sharpen. I slept lightly and woke before dawn. I made oatmeal, tucked the thumb drive into my pocket, and placed it in the box beside a copy of the deed. I stood in the hall, hearing the refrigerator hum and the first bus climb the hill. They think I've lost, I said. They think I'm alone. They think I'm tired. They're wrong. By late morning, another email arrived from Collins's office. I forwarded it to Evelyn without a word and felt the thud of a boundary closing. I cleaned the kitchen the way Linda taught me, and when the phone rang, I answered on the second chime. Dad, we need to move, Daniel said. I booked an appraiser for tomorrow. You just need to be home. Send his license number to my counsel, I said. No appointments without counsel's approval. You're making this complicated, he snapped. Some things deserve complexity, I replied, and ended the call. That evening, Michael returned. We spread the week's notes and went line by line. He recommended a small camera aimed at the entry so that anyone dropping documents would be recorded. We tested it twice and watched the playback. Hesitation is honest, Michael said. Confidence is contagious. I walked him to the porch. The wind carried the smell of rain, and the neighbors' chimes made a thin music. Tomorrow the trust gets signed, he said. After that, let them talk. You'll have the ground. I nodded. My breath was calm. I felt the boards I had carried up the steps one by one and varnished until Linda smiled. I thought of Daniel's first wobbly steps on this same wood and of his confident stride now, thinking he owned the hallway. I closed the door, straightened the folders, and let the house settle like a friend taking the other end of a heavy box. I said the line I had earned the right to say aloud, and certain enough to leave an imprint in the grain. They think I'm weak. They're about to learn otherwise. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. The morning I signed the trust, the florist's lilies rose through the stairwell and steadied me. Evelyn slid the pages across the table. I initialed, the notary stamped, and the language became a lock. No sale or transfer of 214 Magnolia without my written consent. We added the savings account ending 4327, $200,000, to the trust, with me as trustee. Evelyn handed certified copies, a checklist, and one instruction I needed most. Call me before you sign anything. I walked down the stairs lighter than I had felt in years. Back home, I scanned the trust, emailed Carla at the bank to annotate my profile, and called the venue's billing office. I stated plainly that I was not a guarantor for Daniel's wedding, that any document claiming otherwise was false, and that my name must be removed from every line. The hold music looped. When the clerk returned, she confirmed the note was added and asked for counsel's contact. I sent Evelyn's info and wrote the time on a yellow pad. Mark Brennan called 10 minutes later. His voice always carries party energy, even on quiet days. He said he had archived Daniel's engagement agreements and could forward vendor contacts, invoice numbers, and red lines where Daniel tried to sneak in family guarantor phrases. He pushed it hard, Mark said, almost apologizing. I refused weeks ago. It felt wrong. I told him to send everything. A minute later, my printer started its cough. Caterer, photographer, florist, band, shuttle, hotel block, cake, linens. I laid them out on the table and made 3 piles, facts I could prove, assumptions they had made, and pressure I would not accept. Michael Reyes arrived that afternoon, carrying a small hard case and a paper bag of donuts we did not need. He set the case on my kitchen table and clicked it open. 2 pocket recorders, a button camera with a magnet mount, spare batteries, and a thumb drive. We tested where my voice carried best in the living room, under the mantel, near the hall corner, halfway down the stairs. He reminded me that my state allowed one-party consent. Record only conversations I'm part of. Keep originals, make backups, and always note the time. He watched me practice until the red light felt like a companion instead of a threat, until I sounded like a man learning a new tool he had long avoided, but now needed to hold. The first voicemail from Daniel landed before sunset. Dad, I'm hearing from vendors. Why would you embarrass us? 10 minutes later. You're being stubborn for no reason. This is a window for better rates. The third was the sharp one, the one that told the truth he had been holding back. Pick up the phone, you selfish old man. I saved each message and labeled the files with the exact time down to the second. Sophia's call came after dinner. Richard, this is petty. Be gracious. You know the house is too much for you. Think of the family. I pressed stop and reminded myself that silence can be a boundary, not a surrender. By morning, the ripples reached the shoreline. Mark forwarded vendor replies. 2 had paused service pending payment clarification. 1 asked if I would confirm a rumored guarantee. I sent Evelyn's letter instead. She had written it in crisp black type. Mr. Caldwell is not, and has never been, a guarantor for your client's event. Any suggestion to the contrary is a misrepresentation. Direct all inquiries to counsel. I CC'd Michael and filed the confirmations. Midday, Carla called to report a declined attempt of $28,150, flagged by the new alerts. I asked her to note it and to add a printed record to my file. She did so without commentary, but the silence between us felt like respect. Then came the public cut. A neighbor texted me a screenshot of Sophia's social post, a flute of champagne on a marble table, and the caption, "So blessed to have our old sponsor cover everything. Luxury, wedding, Daddy pays." I stared at the words until they blurred. The comments were worse than the caption, 24 people laughing about wallets with gray hair. I printed the post and slid it into the folder with a calm hand. I did not exactly feel calm. I whispered to Linda's picture on the mantel, "They turned me into a joke. I'll turn their big day into their downfall." Saying it did not make me mean. It made me clear. Michael showed up with a brown envelope and his detective calm. Inside were clean transcripts of Daniel's voicemails, screenshots of Sophia's post, and the contracts Mark had sent. On top sat Evelyn's new letter addressed to Attorney Collins and copied to the venue and vendors. It laid out the trust I had signed that morning. It warned that continued misrepresentation of my financial involvement could be construed as elder financial abuse. Michael tapped the last paragraph. "This one lands," he said. "They can ignore a bruised feeling. They can't ignore a paper cut with a seal." We mailed the hard copies and saved the proofs of delivery. I watched the postal clerk stamp the receipts and felt the small, real weight of civic life working as designed. At dusk, Collins himself called. I let it roll to voicemail and pressed play with Michael still at the table. His tone sounded polished, then shaky at the edges. "Mr. Caldwell, Collins here. We've received correspondence from Ms. Hart regarding your trust and position. I have advised my clients to cease direct contact. We are reevaluating representation." His last word thinned out like a string pulled too tight. Michael exhaled through his teeth and gave me a look like a nod. "That's the first door closing," he said. "Doors make echoes." The next day, Evelyn filed a notice with the county recorder, so the trust sat in the chain of title like a brick. She emailed a PDF stamped received at 9:42 a.m. I printed 2 and drove one to my safe deposit box. Carla confirmed my alerts were live and that any transaction over $1,000 would ping me instantly. By late afternoon, the venue sent a revised invoice in bold letters. Remaining balance due 72 hours before the event. No third-party guarantors. Failure to pay cancels the booking. I pinned it to my corkboard with 2 small tacks and told myself to breathe. Sometimes the body needs a simple order to stare at a piece of paper until your heart slows down. Daniel rang at twilight. I put the recorder under the mantel and answered on the second ring. He skipped hello. "What did you send Collins?" "The truth," I said, "that I am not paying for your wedding and that my home, worth about $600,000, and my savings, $200,000, are not your ledger." "You humiliated us," he said. "Sophia's parents are asking questions. The venue changed terms. Look what you did." "I asked for honesty," I replied. "The venue asked for payment. Both are reasonable." "You think paper will save you?" he spat. "You're a stubborn, selfish old man." "Paper keeps promises honest," I said, "and I am still your father." For a second, his voice softened like the echo of a little boy asking for help with a bicycle chain. "Just fix it," he pleaded. "I won't," I said, "but you can." I ended the call and wrote the time in my notebook. Later, I listened to the recording twice. The second time hurt less than the first. I labeled the file Caldwell Sucker 6 p.m. Call Truth and backed it up twice. 2 days before the wedding, Collins withdrew in writing. His letter was short and cold. "Our firm no longer represents Daniel Caldwell or Sophia Green. Please direct all communications to the parties." A separate email to Evelyn acknowledged receipt of the recordings. When she forwarded it to me, I sat in the quiet and felt an odd, sober mercy. I had wanted an apology. Instead, I had paperwork and distance. Sometimes that is the only apology a man gets. That night, the rehearsal dinner cracked. I did not attend. I brewed coffee and set Michael's small speaker on the table. We had agreed not to rush a scene, but to build pressure with proof. At 8, the venue manager called me herself. She said they had documented my position and would require full payment by 4 p.m. the next day or cancel the event. Her voice was professional but kind. "Mr. Caldwell, I wanted you to know we listened." I thanked her and, after the call, touched Linda's photo on the mantel and said, "I am doing this the way you would have asked me to. Steady, not loud." That afternoon, the guest list began to buzz. A cousin texted that people were whispering about vendors pulling out, invoices resent with cash terms only, and a bar package now demanding payment in full. Voicemails stacked up like plates in a sink. Daniel swung from pleading to sharp, then to insults I no longer carried home. Sophia called me petty again, annoyed that my stance made her look foolish. I saved every word and replied to none. What they mistook for weakness was simply discipline. What they called cruelty was a boundary set in daylight. Within an hour, my phone filled with new messages. Daniel first, voice thin with panic. "They made us put the bar package on a card. Do you know how that feels?" Sophia next, anger dressed as elegance. "If you wanted to hurt us, congratulations. Petty wins small." Daniel again, tears buried under rage. "Don't call me when you need help." I saved them all and did not reply. Self-control tasted like unsweetened tea, plain, a little bitter, good for the blood. Morning brought the caterer's apology call. A card had bounced on a $34,000 charge. They wanted me to know my name had been removed from all lists. I told them I appreciated their honesty and hoped for a calm day. After we hung up, the house felt still, as if the boards themselves approved of the clean line we had drawn. By midday, Evelyn emailed me a copy of an emergency motion she filed, seeking a temporary order restraining any use of my identity, credit, or property in connection with the event. Attached was my affidavit, 4 pages that set out the house value, the savings amount, the $28,750 attempt, the letters, the recordings, and Sophia's post, with the caption that had traveled farther than she intended. A judge signed a brief order at 3:30 and scheduled a follow-up for the next week. "Keep everything," Evelyn wrote. "We are building a record." The order listed docket number CV 41722 and a hearing line, a thin sentence that felt like a steel bar across chaos today. At 4:30, the venue called again. Funds had not arrived. Cancellation would follow at 6. They offered a small option if the couple wished, a courtyard ceremony without bar, band, or shuttle, paid in cash at arrival. I thanked them for the courtesy and told them I valued their professionalism. When I set the phone down, I looked around the living room at the light, at the photographs, at the silver watch from my father resting beside the trust folder. "This is what protection looks like," I said aloud, testing the calm in my voice. 5 o'clock brought the last hard call. Daniel sounded tired at first. "Dad, the venue is demanding everything. Collins is gone. The caterer wants cash. You trapped us." "I set boundaries," I answered. "I protected what your mother and I built. That isn't a trap. It's a door you refuse to use." "You made us a joke," he said. "No," I said. "Sophia's post did that, and your words when you called me a selfish old man." Silence held the line, heavy as a wet coat. When he spoke again, his voice was small and sharp. "What do you want?" "I want you to stop using my name as leverage," I said. "I want you to stand on your own 2 feet. I want you to call me when you can talk, like a son." He hung up. A minute later, my screen lit with a notice that his earlier post had been edited. The caption was gone. The comments remained. Glitter on carpet. Around 6, Michael knocked, hair damp from the fog, a note of triumph hidden under his steady manner. "They didn't pay," he said. "Cancellation went out. The band booked a smaller job. The florist will hold the arrangements if cash arrives tomorrow. They may still try something at the hotel, but the big machine is off." He studied my face. "You okay?" "I wanted an apology," I said, "but I wanted my house more." "You kept both your house and your soul," he answered. "That's more than most men get in a fight like this." He tapped the folder. "You could pursue their $80,000 letter as coercion, but you don't have to decide tonight." I nodded and walked him to the porch. The evening smelled like wet grass. When he left, I stood there a long minute, listening to the quiet neighborhood and the soft rattle of the old wind chimes Linda loved. I made a simple dinner, washed the plate, checked the locks, and lifted Linda's scarf from the drawer the way habit teaches you to pray. "We are all right," I told her. "They thought I was weak. They know better." I wrote Daniel a letter that said I loved him, that the door was open to a conversation without contracts, and that I would not attend any event that asked me to pay for respect. I sealed it and left it by the hall lamp. I woke early to a quiet phone. No red exclamation points. No new demands. I brewed coffee and stood by the back door watching sparrows fuss in the rosemary. When the mail arrived, one envelope bore Daniel's handwriting. His note started angry and ended tired. He wrote that I had ruined their plans and embarrassed them and that they would do something smaller. There was no apology and no request for one. I set the note aside and thought about small things. The small sound of a notary stamp, the small glow of a recorder's red dot, the small weight of a key to a safe deposit box, how the smalls had added up to a wall. Near noon, Michael texted, "Venue offering partial refund. Vendors resettling. Done." I wrote back, "Thank you." Then I walked through the house again. Every room felt taller. It was not triumph, not exactly. Triumph is loud. This was the hush that follows a storm that did not take the roof. Justice had arrived the way rain does in a dry place, first in a thin line on the horizon, then all at once in a sheet you can hear. Paper had roared. Boundaries had held. The plan built on my silence had collapsed in its echo. I sat in Linda's chair and closed my eyes. Somewhere, in a ballroom that would not see them, a band was packing cables, a florist was misting roses, a baker was boxing a cake that would find a different table. I could hear the echo of a toast that would not be made to an old sponsor. In the quiet, a sentence rose and settled on my tongue. They thought I had lost, but the game only just began. I did not mean revenge, I meant living. Fix the stuck gate, invite the neighbor for coffee, call Michael, and say thank you again. Before evening, I gathered the papers, put them in order, and returned them to the safe place I had made for them. I wiped the table until it shone, set Linda's favorite blue bowl in the center, and dropped 3 lemons into it, because a bright center looks like a promise. I opened the windows and let the house breathe. Tomorrow there would be follow-ups with Evelyn and a trip to the post office, and maybe, if the day allowed, a slow walk around the block. A life, not a battle. The sky warmed toward gold. I stood in the doorway and felt the grain of the floor I laid in 1995. The trust lay where I could touch the raised seal. In the refrigerator's hum and the thin clink of the wind chime, I heard a life reclaimed. I heard Linda's laugh moving through the rooms, and my voice steady and final. They think I'm weak. They're about to learn otherwise. For good. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The rain started before dawn, steady at first, then heavier as the day grew. By the time the morning sun should have lit the sky, the world outside my window had turned into a gray curtain of water. The gutters along Magnolia Street overflowed, and I could hear the gurgle of drains fighting to swallow what the storm poured down. It felt like the sky itself had chosen this day to wash everything bare, as though nature wanted to strip away pretense the same way I had stripped away lies. It was the day Daniel and Sophia had marked in gold letters on their invitations, the day they had boasted about on social media, the day they thought would crown them in luxury. Instead, it became the day rain carved the truth out in public. By mid-morning, the calls began. First, the caterer, her voice a mixture of apology and frustration, explained that without the second half of the $34,000 payment, her staff would not load the vans. Then the florist, saying they could not release the arrangements, over 70 vases of white lilies and roses, without the balance being cleared. The band canceled outright, explaining politely that they had taken another booking once the venue confirmed non-payment. Piece by piece, the tower Daniel and Sophia had tried to build began to collapse. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm they had brought upon themselves. Guests started to arrive at the church, umbrellas flipping in the wind, shoes soaked by puddles that stretched across the parking lot. They looked around in confusion, murmuring to one another about why the aisle wasn't dressed, why the music wasn't playing, and why the air smelled of damp wood instead of flowers. The whispers grew louder as people realized no one was there to greet them. On the sidewalk, I overheard a man mutter to his wife, "They said this was going to be the wedding of the year. Looks more like a mess of the year." His wife pressed her lips together and nodded, water dripping off her umbrella like punctuation. Around noon, my phone buzzed with Daniel's number. For a moment I thought of ignoring it, but I pressed answer. His voice was high and frantic, almost swallowed by the sound of rain hammering in the background. "Dad, they won't set anything up unless they're paid. The florist, the caterer, everyone's walking. You have to step in. Just wire it. It's $80,000. That's nothing to you. You can fix this." I closed my eyes and let the sound of rain steady me. "Daniel," I said, keeping my tone calm, "I warned you. I told you I would not be your wallet. This is the price of greed. This is the life you chose when you treated me as a bank instead of your father." He swore under his breath, then tried again. "Please, Dad, people are watching. Sophia's parents are furious. I'm begging you." "Then let them watch," I said quietly. "They'll see what truth looks like." And I hung up. It was not cruelty that guided my hand. It was clarity. By 3 o'clock the storm was at its fiercest, pounding so hard the church doors rattled against their hinges. Guests huddled inside, damp and restless, many of them already checking their watches, murmuring about leaving. The minister waited with his Bible closed, his expression caught somewhere between pity and embarrassment. Finally, when word spread that the reception hall had locked its doors, the crowd began to drift away. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others laughed under their breath. The luxury wedding Daniel and Sophia had boasted about had become the talk of humiliation. I thought that would be the end of it, but near evening there came a knock at my door. When I opened it, Daniel and Sophia stood on the porch, drenched through, their formal clothes clinging like wet rags. Mascara streaked down Sophia's face. Daniel's tie hung limp and crooked. Behind them, the storm still lashed the street, but the real storm was written across their faces: rage, shame, desperation. "Dad," Daniel said, his voice breaking, "please, you've made your point. We're ruined. Just help us fix it." Sophia's teeth chattered. Whether from cold or fury, I couldn't tell. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she snapped. "Watching us suffer? You're supposed to be family." I looked at them, at the two people who had mocked me online, who had written contracts with my name in ink as if I were already gone, who had treated me not as flesh and blood, but as an ATM. And I felt no glee, only a tired kind of pity. "This is the price of greed," I said firmly. "You turned me into a sponsor, not a father. Today, you saw where that path leads." Daniel's face crumpled, his voice falling into something I had not heard since he was a boy. Regret. "I'm sorry, Dad. I shouldn't have said the things I said. I shouldn't have pushed you. I just thought—" His words fell apart in the rain. For a heartbeat, I almost wavered. Almost. But then I remembered every late night I had worked to pay his tuition, every sacrifice I had made to give him a future, and how easily he had thrown it back in my face. I reached for the door. "I hope someday you understand what respect means," I said. "But tonight, this door closes." And with that, I shut it. Their voices rose outside, muffled by the storm, first pleading, then shouting, then finally fading as they retreated into the rain. I leaned against the door, my chest heavy, but for the first time in months, I felt the weight was not mine to carry anymore. Later that night, I sat by the fireplace. On the table beside me lay the letter from Attorney Collins demanding $80,000, the invoices vendors had forwarded, and the threatening notes Daniel had left on my voicemail. One by one, I fed them to the flames. The paper curled, blackened, then turned to ash. The firelight reflected in the glass of Linda's photo on the mantel, and I whispered to her, "It's done. We're free." The house felt warmer, lighter, as if even the walls sighed in relief. In the days that followed, the aftermath spread like ripples in water. Guests who had attended the debacle told the story with relish, each version making Daniel and Sophia look smaller, more foolish. Vendors refused further business until debts were paid. Sophia's parents, once so proud of their daughter's golden match, pulled their support, ashamed of the public embarrassment. Daniel lost face at work, whispers following him into every meeting. The very reputation he had sought to inflate with a lavish wedding had crumbled into dust. As for me, life grew quieter, easier. The trust Evelyn helped me set up protected my house, still valued at $600,000, from any attempt at sale. My savings, a careful $200,000, sat under new safeguards, untouchable by anyone but me. The alerts at the bank reassured me daily that no one could dip their hands into my pocket again. At night, I slept without waking in dread of phone calls or legal threats. I had not realized how much tension I carried in my shoulders until it was gone. One afternoon, sitting in the living room with a cup of tea, I said aloud, "I don't need them anymore. I have myself." The words surprised me with their truth. For so long I had believed family loyalty meant endless sacrifice, that blood excused betrayal. But no more. Respect mattered more than names on a tree. News of Daniel's downfall continued to reach me in fragments. He and Sophia moved out of their upscale condo into a smaller apartment after losing their deposit on the venue. Creditors circled, vendors sued for breach of contract. Collins, having already withdrawn representation, never returned their calls. Once proud, they now avoided neighbors, their social media accounts gone silent. I felt no vengeance in hearing this, only a sober recognition. Life had handed them the mirror they refused to look into. Meanwhile, I began to rediscover myself. I spent mornings walking through the park near town where oak trees arched above the path like green cathedrals. I joined a small community center group that met twice a week, people my age sharing stories, playing cards, sometimes singing old songs just for the joy of it. For the first time since Linda's passing, I felt the weight of loneliness lift. My laughter, rusty from disuse, returned in small bursts, surprising even me. One evening, after a meeting at the community center, a woman named Margaret handed me a flyer. It was for a volunteer group that helped repair homes for low-income seniors. "We could use hands like yours," she said. Her eyes were kind, her smile steady. I folded the paper into my pocket and thought about it all the way home. That night, sitting again by the fireplace, I looked at Linda's photo and said, "Maybe it's time I gave back in a new way. Not money, myself." The idea filled me with a quiet excitement. Perhaps this was the real inheritance, to leave behind not cash or property, but time and care, something more enduring than a balance sheet. As for Daniel, he tried once more to call. The number lit on my phone, and for a moment I considered answering. But then I remembered the rain-soaked night on my porch, the pleading, the insults, the betrayal. I let it ring until it stopped. Later, I listened to the voicemail. His voice was strained, heavy with exhaustion. He said he was sorry, that he needed me, that he wanted another chance. But he never said the one thing that mattered, that he respected me. I deleted the message. Some doors must remain closed. In the quiet that followed, I felt no bitterness, only peace. I had survived the storm, and in its wake, I found myself intact. The house still stood, the savings were secure, my dignity untarnished. The betrayers had lost their power, their schemes exposed, their arrogance shattered. And I, once the target of their manipulation, was free. The moral came to me one morning as I watched sparrows hop along the fence in the pale light of dawn. Family is not blood. Family is respect. True bonds are built on love and truth, not on contracts and demands. I thought of Linda, of the lessons we had tried to teach Daniel, and though grief stirred, it no longer swallowed me. "The truth always wins," I whispered, and I believed it. Now, with spring approaching, I find myself looking forward again. I plan to sell a small piece of land my father left me, not to hoard the money, but to fund repairs at the community center. I have already spoken with Margaret about joining the volunteer crew. There is life still to live, joy still to be found. As I close this chapter, I feel no desire for revenge, no hunger for recognition, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing I stood firm, that I chose dignity over fear, that I kept what was truly mine, my self-respect. The storm is behind me, and ahead lies clear air, open roads, and the promise of small, good days. And so I set the last ember in the fireplace to rest, brush the ash from the hearth, and whisper once more, not in anger, but in certainty. I don't need them anymore. I have myself. Yet even as I say it, I sense the story isn't finished. Tomorrow I will attend my first meeting with the volunteer group. Perhaps it will lead to new friendships, even new beginnings. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. But whatever comes, I know this. I will meet it, not as a victim, not as a man betrayed, but as someone who stood tall when it mattered most. I woke up one morning with the sound of birds singing outside my window. It had been months since the storm of betrayal tore through my life, and now the silence inside my little apartment felt like a blessing. I still remember the weight of the courtroom, the sharpness of Daniel's voice when he tried to twist the truth, and the cold stare in Sophia's eyes. But those memories no longer carried the power to crush me. They felt like echoes from a past life I had finally walked away from. My new apartment wasn't grand. It was modest, tucked near the edge of a small park, but to me it was a sanctuary. The windows faced east, and every morning the light spilled across my living room, turning the walls gold. The place cost me $200,000, far less than the old family home I had fought so hard to protect, but the freedom it gave me was priceless. I arranged my father's old clock on the mantel, the one he used to wind every Sunday night, and set a vase of fresh flowers on the dining table. For the first time in years, I felt the space around me breathe with peace. Daniel and Sophia's names still surfaced in conversations here and there. They couldn't escape the consequences of what they had done. Word spread quickly in our town, faster than wildfire on a dry summer's day. Friends who once admired their ambition turned their backs when the truth surfaced, that they had tried to rob me, their mother, of $500,000. Their so-called friends disappeared, their invitations to dinners and weddings vanished, and when Sophia's wealthy cousin withdrew her support for their upcoming wedding, the collapse was complete. The reception hall canceled their booking. The caterer demanded payment they couldn't provide it. Even the photographer, who had once gushed about their dream love story, refused to work with them. One cruel decision had unraveled everything they thought made them powerful. I heard they had to move out of the stylish townhouse they rented because they couldn't afford the payments. The last I knew, they were squeezing themselves into a small apartment on the other side of town, where no one cared to greet them in the hallways. Their image of sophistication, of wealth, of status, all of it cracked like glass. And I wasn't the one who destroyed them. They had done it themselves. As for me, my days began to take on a rhythm I had not known for decades. After breakfast, I'd stroll through the park with Mrs. Jenkins, my neighbor from across the hall. She was 72, always wearing a hat with a flower pinned to the side, and she loved to talk about her roses. Walking with her made me realize how much companionship I had missed while being consumed with battles over money and loyalty. On Saturdays, Mr. Ellis, a widower who lived downstairs, joined us. He had a laugh that shook the air like thunder, and stories from his years in the Navy that made us smile. Slowly, these small connections stitched my days with warmth. One evening, as we shared tea in my living room, Mrs. Jenkins said, "You look lighter now, Richard, as if you've set down a burden you should never have carried." I smiled, realizing she was right. I hadn't lost everything. I had gained myself. I still had control of my savings, though I decided to place most of it in a secure account where no greedy hands could reach. I even considered selling part of the property I still owned in the countryside, not out of need, but as a way to simplify my life. The thought no longer frightened me. I no longer saw possessions as anchors tying me down, but as tools I could choose to use wisely. For the first time, money was no longer about fear. It was about freedom. One afternoon, a small surprise came in the mail. At first, I thought it might be another letter from Daniel. He had written to me twice before, begging forgiveness, speaking of regret, but I had not replied. I did not need his words. I had already chosen peace. But when I opened the envelope, I found something entirely different. A handwritten note from a young woman named Claire. She had been one of the students in the scholarship program I had funded when I placed part of my savings into a charitable trust. Her words were simple, but carried a weight that filled my eyes with tears. "Because of you," she wrote, "I can study nursing. I want to spend my life caring for others the way someone once cared for me." She signed it with a small heart and shaky handwriting. I sat at my kitchen table for a long while, the paper trembling in my hands. At that moment, I realized that the money Daniel and Sophia had tried to steal was now building something lasting, something clean. It was no longer a number in an account. It was a seed planting futures for those who truly needed it. That was wealth. That was legacy. Of course, Daniel tried one last time. A few weeks later, I received a message on my phone. His voice was tired, almost broken. "Mom," he said, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't sleep at night. Everything has fallen apart. Please, can we talk?" I listened, but I did not reply. I whispered to myself, "I don't need his apology. I have my life now." That was the truth. Family is not defined by blood when blood turns to poison. It is defined by respect, by dignity, by love that doesn't betray. And I finally had that in the people around me, in the quiet mornings, in the letters of gratitude from strangers who became part of my story. In the evenings, I often sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the park lights flicker on. Children played until dusk, their laughter floating through the air, and couples strolled hand in hand. Sometimes I joined the community center down the street, where Mrs. Jenkins convinced me to help with a charity bake sale. I never thought I'd enjoy such things, but standing behind a table covered in pies and cakes, greeting people with a smile, I felt alive. The room was filled with music, laughter, and the smell of cinnamon rolls. That night, as I walked home with flour still dusting my sleeves, I realized life had given me back a sweetness I thought I had lost forever. And so, when I think of Daniel and Sophia now, I feel no anger, only distance. They chose their path, and I chose mine. The contrast could not be sharper. They live in the shadow of regret, clutching at the remnants of a reputation that no longer matters. I live in the sunlight of truth, with neighbors who knock on my door not for money, but for friendship. Every day I wake up knowing that dignity, once reclaimed, can never be stolen again. That is my victory. Sometimes I whisper to myself before bed as I turn off the lamp. I finally found the place I belong, and I believe it. My life is no longer defined by betrayal, but by the courage to walk away, by the strength to rebuild, and by the quiet joy of mornings filled with light. Family isn't about blood. It's about respect and dignity. Once you reclaim it, no one can take it away. That is the lesson I carry, the lesson I leave behind. And with that, I close this chapter of my life, not with sorrow, but with peace. The story has come to an end. It has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.